Hi, my name is Staci Neustadt. I am the CEO at Making Sense of Autism and a speech language pathologist. Our founder is Susan Golubock. She's an autistic retired occupational therapist. And we talk all about autism. As a speech therapist, I ask Sue questions because we are trying to educate everyone on viewing the world through the autistic lens. And so, Sue, today I was really thinking about how much my mindset has shifted, even just when you and I worked together 20 years ago, and then when you came to me 5 years ago with the neuro strength-based support for autism framework. My mindset has just shifted, whether it's when I read an IEP, whether it's how I view my clients. And I know when, I really started working with autistic individuals years ago, our training really taught us to focus on the deficits, what was wrong, what needed to be fixed. But now I see things so differently, thanks to you. So, in that foundation of our framework of understanding the neurological differences, seeing the strengths, seeing the potential strengths, the barriers and the triggers have completely shifted how I view all of my clients. So, I want you to kind of talk about those today because I feel like when people think of strengths, they just think of like what someone's good at, but they don't really view what they should view in the autistic. And then we'll talk about potential strengths and barriers and triggers. But share first, like what should people be looking at when they see autistic strengths?
And this is unfortunate. Um, uh, we had an OT once that researched the literature for autistic strengths, and she found a wide collection. But then she realized that people's perception of those strengths were negative. And so, yes, people are seeing just because they're different. They're not typical of we would think of people's strengths, non-autistic strengths. Um, Autistics, a strength is something that not only you want to do, you're highly motivated. That's definitely a strength. Something that you enjoy doing and seek to do, which of course is the motivation, but also what you can do. Just because you can do it. If you can't, oh, I've got an autistic friend who was just bemoaning the other day that growing up as a child, they kept insisting she learn math. And she just has no capacity for math at all. And yet they were wasting their time year after year trying to teach her math when that just was not an area of the brain that could compute things. And there's a reason for it, medical reason why. She has a severed corpus callosum. So she couldn't go over to the right hemisphere easily to do math. And that's where mostly math is done. But see, if people don't understand the neurological differences in the way the brain works, they're trying to make an autistic brain into a neurotypical brain. And they're wasting everybody's time. So between the strengths that what people what they're seeking to do, what they can do, you want to look at those things and say, hey, these are their learning strengths. Hey, if the autistic spends hours on the computer, they're telling you, I can learn from the computer. What do you think they're doing on the computer? They're searching for knowledge they can understand. Most autistics do visuals better than the auditory processing, according to research. So it's logical that they can learn from a visual source as opposed to being taught verbally something. And yet, how do teachers teach in the classroom? Verbal. They tell them what they need to know, tell them what to do instead of showing. So this is the difference between looking at a strength and deciding that, hey, let's tap into what they already know, can do. Let's build on what they already know, as opposed to something totally irrelevant to them or things that they have no interest in whatsoever. you can't get anywhere if there isn't a basic foundation of a desire to learn or knowledge to build on.
And, there's even this whole idea of strengths and building on strengths is a big kind of buzzword, and it's been around for a little bit. There is a company that actually you can take a test and figure out what your strengths are. And their whole concept is the same thing. Like, here's your strengths, let's build on them. So we're trying to do kind of the same thing with our students, our
Mhm.
clients. But I think the biggest obstacle is, like you said, people are viewing it through the neurotypical lens, not the autistic lens, which is super important. And then I love, I never thought about potential strengths until, this framework. And again, this is like a whole new kind of idea and concept. And sometimes we might inadvertently be doing this, but explain to the audience what a potential strength is.
A potential strength is basically what you see the autistic initiate, i.e., they want to do, they want to learn. The desire and motivation is there, but maybe they don't have quite enough knowledge or they haven't developed the skills they need to achieve what they want in life. Um, and that is going to guide you or should guide you in determining what goals you're going to set. Why not teach them what they want to learn? Most autistics want to learn more about the special area of interest that they have and that they excel at. The knowledge that they pick up and the desire to learn that knowledge is meaningful to them. Um, so why not help them? Most autistics, that would be their career.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a wonderful goal. The autistic brain um, can hyperfocus more so than the non-autistic brain. And we pick up detail. All of those are strengths, but people don't look at it. Well, yeah, you've got useless knowledge. I don't want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to us, it's relevant and it's meaningful. And hey, I could go somewhere with that. I could make a career out of being an expert in this particular area.
Mm-hmm.
So why are you denying me to learn what it is I want to learn? Why are you saddling me with learning to tie my shoes, which number one is a useless thing because there's Velcro.
Mm-hmm.
So no one needs to learn to tie shoes. Why are you wasting your time when there are more relevant things to me that I'm going to want to learn from you and want to work with you,
Mm-hmm.
which makes a whole lot more sense.
And talk about potential strengths with like in the school, because obviously we've got core curriculum, we have certain things that kids have to learn in school.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So how do you figure out like strength versus potential strength versus like, sorry, you have to learn this, and how do you incorporate all of them?
Easy enough. If you build on their strengths, incorporate their strengths into whatever you're trying to teach them. Um, if you're trying to teach them math and their particular interest, what motivates them is trains and train schedules. Do you know how much math goes into the speed, the timing, the number of cars, the cubic centimeters? No, not centimeters, but feet. That I mean, there's so much math that you could talk about relative to trains,
Yeah.
and that's going to make sense to them. Now they're going to see the relevance of learning math that helps them expand that potential strength and pulling in their strengths to expand that knowledge that they have in an area that is meaningful to them.
Yes, and I love that you gave that example, and I'm sure people watching this are probably like, what about this topic? So if you have a student that you're thinking of, just drop a comment below and we'll reply and give some ideas. Because I feel like all of this, you have to sort of be a detective, and you have to understand how the autistic brain works, but then you have to be observant with what the student or client is good at, what they're trying to do, but they're still struggling with. And it really is just kind of sitting back and observing, because I feel like too many times, yes, as therapists, as teachers, we have things we have to do, and sometimes we get stressed about it. But I think if we just take a deep breath and just kind of sit back, like, oh, wow, look, that student always goes to the number puzzle every morning. I could use that to, maybe they love puzzles, so I could use it for the ABCs. I could use it for numbers. I could use it for whatever.
Mhm.
So sometimes it is just kind of sitting back. So then we have barriers. And I know we've switched this name a little bit over the years of using this. It was limitations. I like how we switched it to barriers, but kind of describe what are barriers, and how should therapists, I guess, how do they use the idea of barriers?
A barrier is simply something that's getting in your way of accomplishing something. Many autistics have apraxia. They have poor muscle tone, and so the muscles don't squeeze the sensory receptors inside them. So when they do an action, unless they're looking and deliberately watching their body do something, they don't get the feedback that tells them the motor memory they need to master a skill. So, with the difficulties in motor coordination, this can become a barrier. Yes, it's a difference in how they function, but it can get in their way. So now you need to think, whenever there's a barrier, how can we get around it? How can we get over it? What compensatory strategies might help them? You're already going to tap into their motivation to try harder, but still there's barriers that you may need to get around. So, for example, for the child that is using an AAC device, but they have poor motor control. So when they go to press one button, they overshoot or undershoot, and they press something they didn't mean to. Well, you can put a weight on their hand or wrist to make the muscles have to work harder to give them more feedback so that they can better control their movements. This is where you'll want to work with the occupational therapist, who understands a lot of the sensory needs and can help compensate for, come up with ideas to help you compensate for the motor or sensory issues that may be the barriers
Mhm.
that are somehow preventing them from being as successful as they would like to.
And I think we kind of, as like, I think about the key guard whenever I have a kiddo who is struggling with accessing, I'll recommend a key guard for their AAC device. So I think we kind of sometimes already support those barriers with different tools and assistive technology. But again, it goes back to, if you're thinking through that neurotypical brain, you might be missing some of those barriers that occur. And so it's so important to understand what those could
Well,
be.
consider you can see a physical problem,
Hmm.
a coordination problem. What you can't see is, for example, auditory processing and the fact that autistics need literal, concrete language
Hmm.
to understand what you're saying. So an autistic can read voraciously, but you ask them the meaning of the words or the meaning of the context of what they read, they don't have a clue.
Yeah.
So you can't see that, but that becomes a barrier, is understanding the meaning of the words that people are feeding them, which is why we often pair auditory with visual. So an image, uh, the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words
Yeah.
for most people, and pictures are very concrete and literal. They are
Hmm.
what they appear to be. whereas words can mean multiple things. And depending on the context or situation in which it's used, it can have a totally different meaning. So words by themselves are not the best way to communicate a concept to an autistic individual, but you don't consider that a barrier because it's not a barrier between
Ex-
non-autistics.
exactly. I would say that's like probably the number one barrier that
Mm-hmm.
we always, I mean, we forget frequently because I think we take it for granted. So then most people know that term triggers. And the old kind of mindset was, oh, that's a trigger, let's desensitize. And we know now that is not the right way to deal with triggers or, you know, or how to react to triggers. So give your definition of triggers and what should we be doing?
Well, triggers are basically the same thing that you consider a trigger. It it an immediate reaction, not a response, but a reaction to some kind of stimulus. It's like you call out someone's name, and instantly they're going to turn around and look. You mean me? Um, it's a trigger that triggers a reaction. Um, but for autistics who have hypersensitivity, um, who are easily overwhelmed because they can't filter out all the input that's coming in, those can be triggers. Is like the straw that breaks the camel's back. I just one more piece of input that you've given me, and I haven't even processed the rest of it. I don't know what to do with all this, so I freeze, or I melt down because I just can't. I don't know where to go. I can't handle it. So triggers, if you don't understand the neurological differences in the way the autistic brain processes input, you can. It's easy to trigger things that would not trigger you
Mm-hmm.
may easily trigger them. And the tendency is, oh, you're just being oversensitive. Or, come on, that's no big deal. Knock it off. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you look at it from your perspective, it wouldn't trigger that for you. But if you don't realize that the way the autistic brain processes information, it is offensive. Why do you think autistics struggle with eye contact? For me, it's like when I have eye contact, it's like they're in my personal space. It's like they're actually physically right in my face and touching me. And that is because I'm very hypersensitive to touch. Light touch, I can't handle. Um, Hugs, yes, but not light touch. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what it feels like to me. So it's painfully uncomfortable to have eye contact. But if that makes no sense to you because you don't experience it that way, it's really hard to shift to thinking that something like that could actually trigger a negative response from the individual that you're not expecting.
Yes. And I think that that's really speaks volumes that if you don't experience it, then you might have a hard time understanding. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why sometimes people will say, oh, it came out of the blue. And it's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
triggers, meltdowns, they don't come out of the blue, whether it's a memory that was sparked, whether it was a sound they heard that you didn't hear, or something like that. And so it is always just kind of being observant and then being compassionate. Like you said, that gaslighting of, oh, you're fine, or get over it, or you're being lazy, or whatever is just not only doesn't bring connection, but that could be a trigger right there that they are just not understood and so frustrated with being not understood. So shifting from that deficit fixed mindset to these four categories of even just observing the strengths, observing the potential strengths, the barriers, the triggers, I know for me has made not only a giant difference in how I do therapy, how I interact with my clients, but also in how I create my goals. My goals are based on those potential strengths, and I make sure to support the barriers and support or avoid those triggers. If it is, loud sounds, making sure we have access to earplugs or headphones, things like that. So I think viewing autistics through that lens of those four things is going to help therapists, even parents, teachers, just kind of shift. So if you do anything today, kind of think about what we talked about with these four areas and just kind of observe and see what you see in your clients or students or even your children. So great information. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you for asking, Stacy.